Hi, and thanks for joining us today. I'm your host, Jacqueline.
And I'm your host, Nicole. You're listening to the first season of Perfictionist.
So, today we're going to be talking about a very popular novel that recently has gone almost kind of viral, I would say, called Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros.
20-year-old Violet Sorrengail was supposed to enter the scribe quadrant, living a quiet life among books and history. Now, the commanding general, also known as her toughest talent's mother, has ordered Violet to join the hundreds of candidates striving to become the elite of Navarre, dragon riders. But when you're smaller than everyone else and your body is brittle, death is only a heartbeat away. Because dragons don't bond to fragile humans, they incinerate them. With fewer dragons willing to bond than cadets, most would kill Violet to better their own chances of success. The rest would kill her just for being her mother's daughter. Like Xaden Ryerson, the most powerful and ruthless wing leader in the Riders Quadrant. She'll need every edge her wit can give her just to see the next sunrise. Yet, with every day that passes, the war outside grows more deadly. The kingdom's protective wards are failing. The death toll continues to rise. Even worse, Violet begins to suspect leadership is hiding a terrible secret. Friends, enemies, lovers. Everyone at Basgiath War College has an agenda. Because once you enter, there are only two ways out: graduate or die.
It is a high fantasy. It's definitely more of an adult book. I think they're recommending people 18 plus kind of read this one. Yeah, it's amazing.
No, I agree. I really enjoyed this book. And I heard a lot of people suggest this was a slow burn book. And I understand what they're saying in regards to the romantic aspect of it. And it could just be I'm misunderstanding what slow burn means. If they're only saying like slow burn is specifically talking about relationships, then I think I would agree with that assessment of the relationships in the story are ones that kind of builds.
Yeah.
However, the story itself I found to be very high action, very quick. There was nothing slow about the story itself, in my
No.
opinion.
Yeah. It was very fast paced, page turner, hard to put down at night kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess it's a slow burn romance, but when I think of this book, I do not that is not a phrase that comes to mind to me at
hmm
all.
Yeah, no, I think this is a book that can get you in trouble. As in, you won't want to put it down. You will
Yeah.
ignore everyone in your life.
Yeah.
Your friends and family will wonder what happened to you as
Yes.
you squirrel away and stay up all night reading it.
Unfortunately, I was reading this, well, or fortunately, I don't know. On the camping trip that we just went on when I promised to read Seven Husbands, I was actually reading Fourth Wing. And I was so involved in it, I was just rudely ignoring everybody while I was reading my
I feel like camping and reading, though, just goes hand in hand. So
Me
hopefully
too.
everyone can be understanding of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think like the family I went with, they're not so into reading. So I think for them, it's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm reading because that's what you do when you're camping.
Yeah, I'm entertaining
also,
myself. Do the
also, I
same.
have no self control and I can't put this down. The main character whose point of view that we see the story unfold, her name is Violet Sorrengail. What a cool name.
hmm I
I
like that
I
name.
sometimes think, how do these authors come up with such cool names? Like Sorrengail? It just
Yeah,
sounds so
that's a
main
different one.
character, right?
hmm And
Yeah.
I feel like her name kind of reflects her in a sense too, because Violet seems so delicate and
Yes.
soft,
And
where
small. Yeah.
Sorengale, it just has like a punch to it.
Oh yeah, it's very powerful sounding.
hmm
Yeah,
So
so
I like
she's
the contrast between her first and last name.
yeah, it's a beautiful name in my opinion. So she's about 20 years old and At first, I was a little confused about because they're going to like this academy kind of situation. So I was picturing younger, but then I realized, okay, like this is more like college age type thing. It's
Hmm.
like they've become an adult now; they're going into their careers, kind of thing.
Yes, that was the sense I got as well. It's kind of like, yeah, college, finishing school.
Yeah, I think that if probably people in the states who are more familiar with like a military type lifestyle,
Mm.
this would they would totally get it right away. But if you're someone who's completely unfamiliar with like a military lifestyle, you might like for me it took a second to understand the what the heck was going on.
Yeah.
And then we also have another character, longtime friend of Violet. His name is Dane, and then
Hmm.
another sort of character that we're not sure what to think of called Zayden.
Hmm. And they're all like a little bit old. Like Dane is a little bit older, like he's a year ahead of Violet, and then Zayden is a year ahead of that as well. So they're all
Yeah.
kind of relatively close to the same age, but each one is a bit older, at least a year. It's unclear of if they always start the academy training at 20 or if you could kind of enter at 20, 21, 22. Like it's a little unclear if it's like a strict cutoff or if you can kind of enter it once you've turned 20. Like that's a starting point, but you can enter it
Hmm.
beyond that. I feel like I got the impression that you had a couple years to make that choice.
Yeah. That's the impression I had as well. I don't know exactly. Like I've read it twice and I'm still like, I'm not sure. I'm not
Yeah.
sure about
I
that.
think
But
it's safe to say all of the main and minor characters who are like at the academy, not the educators, but like the students, I guess you could call them, are in their early 20s.
yeah, exactly.
So there are a lot of different themes that pop up throughout this story. I think one of the strongest ones that stood out to me was kind of this idea of family and the difference or juxtaposition between blood family and found family, which
Hmm.
I thought was really cool to examine that because they are at this academy, as we've mentioned, and you would imagine when you like go to school with people, especially when it's like more specialized school, you definitely form a bond with the people you're going to school with.
Of
So
course.
you have that sense, but as you're reading this book, you'll start to realize it's very different. They don't necessarily get to form the same bonds because of the nature of the academy or the section of the academy that they're in.
Hmm.
And it's really interesting to see the development of the relationships and that idea of family and how it looks in this particular world.
Yeah, in that setting, it has to mean something sort of different. And yeah, can't say too much without spoiling it.
Hmm.
But yeah.
And there's a lot of really beautiful friendships that kind of come out of that as well. It's almost like the found family, but also like the friendships that are woven into that idea and just how it plays out given the setting. It's
Hmm.
really interesting
It
and
is.
kind of a unique take on developing friendships in a place that isn't necessarily welcoming to that sort of a relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many good themes in this story. There's just so much to love about it.
Hmm. Yeah, it seems to be quite trope heavy as well. A lot of the tropes, though, if I feel like we don't want to like say what they are because I feel like that gives away some of the aspects of the book
Exactly.
just to like
Yeah.
name the tropes that are in there.
Yeah.
But it's definitely, it plays on a lot of elements that you find in this type of novel. So you're going to, if you choose to read it, you're going to see a lot of similar elements that you might have read before. But I think they're done in a nice, unique, kind of different way than perhaps you've read before.
They are. So, speaking of that, like how it's done in a unique way. So, this book is high fantasy. I think there are some people I've seen online who have kind of a problem with the way that it's written. So, I think that's. Sorry, guys, but you guys are full of shit, if you know what I mean. But, like,
But we respect your opinion.
I respect your opinion, but I don't agree with it at all. And I'm, in fact, kind of
Yes.
like disgusted as a fellow reader. It's like okay, it's high fantasy, that's the genre. You are allowed to write in whatever style you want. Okay, let's just
Mm-hmm.
think about this for a second. I'm a writer myself, and when you're sitting there and you're writing, you're very much in your own head. Okay, so then when you have
Mm-hmm.
people come out and say, yeah, it was written like this, and that's not like a fantasy at all. Well, if you don't like it, go read something else. There, that's my
Yeah.
little rant for the
No,
moment.
I
But
completely agree that a genre and a writing style are different, and a writing style is very personal to the author.
yes,
So I can
yes.
see it being a little insulting to say I don't like the writing style, or you know, this or that about the writing style. Like that's their signature. That is
Hmm.
how the writer
And
writes.
and like people didn't say her writing style specifically. It was more like this is high fantasy and it's not written like a high fantasy. And it's like, well, that it's a bestseller for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's like why I think it's refreshing to see a genre done so differently, right? And
Mm-hmm. I
also
was just gonna say.
it has been written. High fantasy has been written like this before, like in the Hunger Games, that
Mm-hmm.
that like first person present sort of tense. It gives a sense, in my opinion, and maybe others too, see if you agree, of urgency. This writing style, like it gives a rawness that isn't necessarily there in like the third person uh,
Mm-hmm.
past tense writing style. So
Yeah.
I always feel like, okay, we're in for like some really intense stuff, and like this is going to be fast paced, and usually it is. So
Mm-hmm. No, there was nothing about it that made me like in terms of the way it was written that made me question how the story was being told. Like I think it made complete sense. Like it seemed very authentic, and the way that we were in the perspective of Violet, I felt like we got to really know who she was
hmm
and see her develop as a character over time. And it's hard for me to imagine it being written any other way.
yeah, I also really enjoyed the way that it was so sort of raw. I think that it suited the environment that they were put in.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree.
It's hard to be fluffy when your environment's not fluffy.
Yes, this environment is anything but fluffy.
So, oh, here we go. It's always with these fantasy books where it's like, forgive my butchering of the pronunciations, guys. We're going to try really hard, but, like, sounds a certain way in my head. If it's, sorry about that.
And this book
Um,
is so new, it does not have a handy dandy pronunciation guide for us.
yeah,
So
exactly.
we're just going to go with it. And everyone can have different pronunciations, and that's okay.
Yes. And if they ever come out with a pronunciation guide, we will have a look at that. But in the meantime, my apologies. So they talk about the continent. So in the continent, there's three sections. Navarre. Are we in
Sounds good
agreement
to
of how
me.
that? Okay.
I think I
Poromil.
said Navarre, but Navarre sounds good. Sorry.
Oh, Poromil. Poromil.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
And the Barons. Yay!
Yeah,
That's one
that
I
one's
can
easy.
pronounce. Yeah. So where Violet is going to, like the college, is the
Mm-hmm.
Basgiath War College.
Mm-hmm. And it's in Navarre.
Yes. So within this war college, there are four quadrants. So we have the infantry quadrant, the
Mm-hmm.
healer quadrant, the scribe quadrant, and the rider quadrant.
Mm-hmm. And our story takes place mostly in the rider quadrant, but we do hear about the other ones to some degree. My understanding is that at the age of around 20, students or individuals can choose to enlist in one of the four quadrants. It doesn't sound like it is a choice because we do meet a character who has a twin sister who does not enter the college. So it sounds to me like you can choose to go if you want to. However, there are some exceptions to that rule. And in order to get in, you have like a couple months and then you have to take some sort of a test to fully get to stay within that quadrant and get to learn about it and train.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting world. I like the world that was built. I like that we get to hear about the world as a whole, or like the continents, and we hear a little tiny bit, and I'm assuming that's going to become more relevant
Mm-hmm.
in book number 2, which
Mm-hmm.
is why we're kind of introduced to the dynamics of the overall world. But I also like that we have this kind of micro world inside of the college itself that has all these quadrants, and then within the quadrants we have it further breaks down, as we will kind of get into in the in the spoilers discussion. But it's just like a fascinating little world.
Mm-hmm. It is.
So, in regards to the overall plot of Fourth Wing, obviously we're not going to give away the plot here because that would just be cruel. But I will say that I was pleasantly surprised by the plot of the story and how the story went on. An aspect of the story is that anyone who goes into the rider's wing eventually needs to pick a mount in which they will ride. And I kind of thought that was going to be like the big epic end point of this story. I thought it was just going to be all about the college and getting to the point of finally getting to be a rider. And that was going to be like da 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 da. But like that happens before the first half of the book. I feel like we're not even halfway through, and that scene is taking place. And so I was like, oh, where is this going to go? And was so intrigued
Mm-hmm.
by where it did end up going and just how much further the story was taken than what my brain could even come up with, like from the brief description of the
Mm-hmm.
synopsis.
I'm so glad that it did too, though, because
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like if it had gone the other way, it would be so much more torturous waiting for the second book to come out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm very glad that it's not going to be too long of a wait because I believe that's coming out this fall,
Yeah,
which is it seems like a fast turnaround because Fourth Wing came out this spring. Like it's
that
a
is
quite
fast.
new
Yeah.
book. And then to have the second one come out in the fall,
It
like I
makes me
assume it
like,
must have been written together maybe and then split into 2 books.
yeah, possibly. That's kind of what I was thinking as well. Did you have any kind of emotions whilst reading this book?
I had a lot of emotions while reading this book. I think I went through the gambit of all of the emotions while reading this book, like anger, check, sadness, like check, cried for sure. Um, and like blush definitely happened. Like it was a whirlwind adventure. At
Yes.
times, I was reading this book and was like, I hope no one walks in the room right now. Because there are moments that maybe you would prefer not to be surrounded by people. I don't know if you are the kind of person who like brings a book with you everywhere you go and reads it while you're waiting in line, or I'm not sure, there are scenes in this book I'm not sure you want to read while waiting for your doctor's appointments, but you do
Uh,
you.
yeah. Yeah, I
What
was
about
reading those
you?
scenes when I was surrounded by my family camping, and I was like,
That would be uncomfortable. I think for me it would be uncomfortable.
I was so like sucked into the book that I like forgot where
Yeah,
I was. So
that's fair.
I was just like kind of glancing around, like no one can see my screen, right? Okay. Yeah.
There's one thing I read online about this book, kind of jumping back to like the story itself. It was just one person's opinion, but I'm assuming other people thought this as well. They had mentioned they thought that there was like no character development. Like it was someone who clearly did not enjoy the book, and that is totally fair. Everyone's entitled to their opinion and giving the reasons why. And one of the reasons was they thought there was no character development, that the characters were shallow, especially like the minor characters. And I have to say, I respectfully disagree. I think the major characters go through pretty big arcs in their development. And I think even the minor characters, we get to know them well enough for the story that is being told, if that makes sense. Like, of course, they're minor characters. We're not going to see this massive change in them. That's not their role. But I think we get to know, like, I feel like I know each of them. Like, if they were to do something out of character, I would notice that because I feel like I know enough about who they are as a character.
So, you can have an opinion that there was no character development. That's your prerogative. Your opinion is wrong.
You're sassy today.
I am. You're allowed to have your wrong opinions. We can
Yeah,
respect that
you're
your opinion
entitled
is
to a
wrong.
wrong opinion. That's fine.
Yeah.
We're not going to take it from you.
No.
We will
Keep
just
living in your
disagree
own
with
little
you.
fantasy world of wrong opinions. So I just think that any extra character development would have been extraneous for those guys. It would have been
Hmm.
like, it wouldn't have helped with the plot line. And
Hmm.
keep in mind, this is only the first book. If it was a standalone book, then yes, your opinion is not wrong. But it's not a standalone book. It's going to be, I don't know if it's just going to be the two books. I'm under the impression when I looked it up, it seems like it's just going to be the two. Because there is another book coming, there is still the potential for these more minor characters to have more character development. In regards to the main character, there is character development. So your opinion is wrong.
Hmm.
You salty person online, you.
Oh,
anyway,
goodness.
anyway, but
Anyways.
all joking aside, I can actually see where they're coming from, but it's not enough to detract from the overall quality of the story.
Hmm. I do think that this book is an interesting book because I think 100% it is for adults.
Oh yeah.
And there is just like the more steamy scenes, like the romance elements in this book are mature, in my opinion.
Oh yeah.
And but the story itself about being like a college with dragons, it kind of leans a little young. So I can
Mhm.
see how a lot of middle school or high school students would be very intrigued by this book. It almost reads young adult to
Mhm.
me,
Oh, for sure.
in like
Yeah.
even the way it's presented,
Yep.
but just because of the way the romance is written, I feel like it's adult. So I can see it being a little confusing for maybe some people who, because it falls right in that middle. I think it is very much a young adult in the sense of like someone who is an adult but young. But
Oh, I
usually young adult
completely
is
agree with
like,
that. And
I
when
feel
when
like
that
young adult is a bad label because it's like, are they adult or are they young? It like gets muddled a bit.
I mean, young adult is like Violet, like 20, right? She's young,
Hmm.
a young adult, right? Uh, with when that person that I like was kind of being like, "You're wrong,"
Yeah.
when they said it was shallow, like I feel like probably what they were getting at was what you were just mentioning. Like the style is kind of like young, and so therefore it's sort of shallow. And so, like,
Hmm.
I totally agree, like with that, if that's what they meant. Coming from, okay, here's another book with dragons, Game of Thrones, right? It's
Hmm.
extremely adult. It's not right. The way
Yeah.
that it's written is much more mature sounding. But we're also in Violet's head, and she is a young adult, and so we are hearing her thoughts and just it's not, again, it's not third person. So if it was written in like third person, you have the opportunity for it to sound a bit more mature, but it's not. It's written in first person, and she is young and she's going through this. So yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, you need to put yourself in the perspective of a 20-year-old and how you would experience the world at that age, or else it might
Yes.
seem a little off.
Yeah.
But
Totally.
I
Yeah.
I think for people who are interested in reading a story about young adults, like keeping in mind like mature content aside, that is like the genre it's written for.
Yeah.
Then I think if you like a fantasy book with a little twisty romance in there, then you will like this. But if you are expecting something that is more adult, then you might find it a little like childish, if that
Yes.
makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. You've summed that up really nicely. But yeah, if you like accept it is what it is, the way that it is, it's
Hmm.
extremely enjoyable, page turning. Yeah, if you can just like let go of certain things, yep, you're gonna love it.
Hmm. Well, I found this book to be incredibly nostalgic. it reminded me so much, like, from looking at the map of the school, like, right from that moment, I was like, "Oh, that reminds me so much of Harry Potter," just, like, the fact that it's at a college or, like, a
Yeah,
school,
a school
and just
setting.
kind of had that more castle-y-ish vibe to it. But
Yeah.
there's so many other books from my young adult, kind of older adolescence that it reminds me of, like, very much like Divergent,
Mhm.
as well
Oh, for
as
sure.
Hunger Games. Like, those pieces were
Yeah.
so big for my upbringing, or, like, my reading upbringing
Yeah,
when
yeah.
I was at that early 20s or, like, a little earlier. So this book for me was just, like, so nostalgic.
Yeah, when I was reading this book, Divergent vibes for sure because of the way that they have, like, the quadrants and the way that
Mhm.
yeah, it was very yeah. So if you enjoyed Divergent, you will for sure enjoy Fourth Wing.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and the Hunger Game elements, it's not like Hunger Games, but there's just aspects of it that have that same kind of vibe.
Totally, exactly. Yeah, I felt the
Mhm,
exact same way, and also the point of view is written like Hunger Games too.
mhm,
I think Hunger Games comes across a lot more mature because Katniss is a lot more mature.
mhm. Yeah, definitely very different main characters.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
I feel as though people who are around our age, like early 30s, will really enjoy it if they also read those books when they were in their late teens, early
exactly.
20s.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
it's
If
it's
this
like
sort of
coming
book has
home.
never appealed to you, then I don't know. I don't know. Fourth Wing is like a really addicting read if you
Mhm.
enjoy reading. So I'm not
It
sure.
could be the book to get you into the genre if you haven't
Yeah,
enjoyed it necessarily in the past, but I definitely think that you will for sure enjoy it if you've read the books we've talked about.
exactly.
It's a nice, easy one to get into fantasy. If you have never read high fantasy, I think this would be a fun way to start.
It's a really good way to start. Yeah. If you do end up reading Fourth Wing and you enjoy Fourth Wing and you have not read the series Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas, we highly recommend that you give it a try. It features a very strong, cunning female lead, and she starts out like in a younger age, in a younger place. It is definitely more I want to say like comprehensive, like high fantasy. It's much more in depth than what we've had so far
Mhm.
in Fourth Wing. We can't say like this isn't deep because this is just the first book, right? This is our
Mhm.
introduction to this world. But Throne of Glass is a finished series, so if you enjoyed Fourth Wing and you're looking for another really good read, we recommend Throne of Glass.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Next week, we will be continuing our conversation about Fourth Wing and getting into all the nitty gritty, the details, what went down, and what we thought about it.
So thanks for joining us today, and we hope to see you there.
Bye for now.